Hi guys, and welcome back to APG. Now we have a brand new build series starting up and I am so excited for it. It's been a few years in the making. I've had to put this project off for a while and I am finally able to get back into it and I want it running this year. So it's gonna be a big one and the car should be just behind this door. Let's have a look. Oh wait, no, the car's not here yet. It's not this one. I still need to go pick it up. But what I do have here is I do have the engine block that is going into it. And over here I have some of the parts going in. The rest of them are inside. But here we have the pistons. These pistons are a Roger Clark Motorsport, a 2.1 stroker piston. So this engine will be getting stroked. It will be getting a set of I-beam Nido rods and also a 2.5 nitrated crank. So this is a 2-litre block. First, I need to do some measurements in the engine. I need to do bearing clearances. I then need to do the piston ring clearances. So let's go and get through with all of that. For those of you that aren't Subaru fanatics and don't really know much about Subarus, this engine block has been what is known as closed-decked. So essentially what it is closing off the coolant galleries to add a bit more rigidity to the top of the cylinders. We do have ports that have been drilled out to allow coolant to come through, but these extra sleeves have been put in place to keep the top of the cylinder from expanding and contracting and possibly causing a crack, especially under higher boost pressures.
Subaru engines are a bit different to other engines when assembling or disassembling, as they are a flat engine design and have two case halves.
When you are rebuilding an engine or even doing new pistons in an engine, you will always get new piston rings. Now, there are 3 layers of piston rings in most engines. You've got your top layer, which thankfully they have labeled these. Most companies do label them, which ones are the first ring. Then you've got your second rings and your oil control rings. Now, where these rings do go in the pistons is very crucial, just as crucial as the end gaps. So don't mix them up if you are rebuilding your engine. If you're unsure, research.
Setting the correct ring gap on aftermarket piston rings is crucial for proper engine performance and longevity. In a perfect world, piston rings that perfectly fit the bore with the ends butted together would be ideal. But anyone who has tried to make an omelette and ended up with a breakfast scramble can tell you, the world is an imperfect place. As the block, pistons and rings all heat up, they change dimensions ever so slightly and at different rates. As the engine heat cycles back and forth through its maximum temperature, the rings will expand and contract. If the gaps are too small, the rings will end up running into itself. Since the ring has nowhere to expand at this point, the outward force applied to the cylinder increases. This added force introduces even more heat and the ring expands further. Once this happens, catastrophic failure will occur rapidly, as it is a continuous cycle of more heat, more outward pressure, and nowhere for the rings to expand into. So when measuring your rings, you want to take a little bit of material off at a time. Remeasure, make sure they're perfect. You can always take more material off, you can't put it back on.
I have got all the second piston rings all finished up in all 4 bores. Just need to check the oil rings and then we can go on to clearances. All right, so now that the piston rings are all gapped and ready to go back in, I need to get on with doing the main bearing clearances, also the conrod clearances. So for that, I have to measure up the crank journals, put the bearings into the case halves, bolt the case halves together, take measurements and work it all out that way. I do have one of my first year apprentices here with me. She's gonna learn. It's the first time she's seen an engine going together, so we'll give her a run and see how she goes.
We are giving the bearings a good clean before putting them into the case halves. This way, we know they are free of debris and won't have any discrepancies when we do our measurements before final assembly. Once the bearings are put into the case halves, we then have to bolt the case halves together, torque it all down, then we can start taking our measurements.
case halves are together, main bearings are all in. I do need to now torque down all the case bolts to pull it together. Then we can measure up the clearances inside. I will have to measure up the crank as well and compare it all. So let's get into it. Case halves are all bolted and torqued down, so now I need to measure up the main journals on the crankshaft, and then we can measure the bearings and work out what our oil clearance is. So to get the clearance, I need to measure the journals of the crank with a tool like this. This is called a micrometer. Essentially, you put it over there, dial it down, read the gauge, and then you get your reading. Now that I've taken the crank journal measurement, I have to set up the bore gauge in order to be able to get the clearance measurement from the bearing. Once the bore gauge is all zeroed off, we can slide it on in to the bearing and we can get our measurement.
Just like piston ring gaps, bearing clearances are very crucial to a healthy running engine. Too tight and you can have metal on metal contact and end up damaging the engine. This is more commonly known as a spun bearing. Bearing clearance refers to the space or gap between a bearing and the shaft or housing it sits into. This clearance is crucial for proper lubrication, preventing the metal on metal contact and allowing for thermal expansion and contraction of the components.
Done all the bearing clearances. I'm not particularly happy with the clearances I'm getting out of cylinder 1 and cylinder 3, so now I'm going to have to split the block apart yet again. I will change those bearings over and see whether we get a different reading. Now it's time to measure up the main bearing sizes. So we've already got the bearings inserted into the con rods. They're all torqued up. So we need to measure the crank and then again, measure the bearings and see what kind of clearance we get.
Once again, we are cleaning up everything before we take our measurements. You can also measure bearing clearance with the use of plastic gauge. Plastic gauge is a plastic strip which deforms when compressed between two surfaces to allow you to measure the amount of clearance between them. Personally, I prefer to use a dial and bore gauge as they are a little bit more precise, although plastic gauge works just as well.
All the big end bearings have been measured up. They're all within spec, and thankfully the machine shop did a really good job on grinding the crank because they are all even. There's no variation between any of the big end sizes, so that's really good, and credit to Dominator Engines for doing the machine work on this.
Now that all the clearances are measured and I'm happy with them, it is time to clean all the parts again and begin assembling. We apply some engine assembly lube to all the conrod bearings before attaching them to the crankshaft and torquing them down to the manufacturer's specs. Most aftermarket conrods will come with ARP bolts. It is important to know which bolts you have as they all have a different torque setting. Once torqued, I then measure the bolt stretch as per the manufacturer's specifications. I also like to give the conrods a bit of a spin around the crankshaft just to make sure they spin freely and there is no grabbing or any tightness. Now we apply some assembly lube to all the main bearings in both case halves, drop the crankshaft along with the conrods attached into one half, fit the O-rings for the oil and water galleries, add some slaz to the other case half, put it together and torque it all down. When you are assembling a short motor on a Subaru, always replace these washers for the bolts that go through the coolant galleries. Never reuse the washers because you can end up with coolant mixing with oil. The last thing we need to do to assemble this short block is to fit the pistons, starting by fitting up the piston rings to their correct locations. The second ring, also known as scraper ring, usually has a groove cut into the underside of the ring that scrapes all the oil from the cylinder wall and back down into the sump. Once all the rings are fitted, we then give the pistons and the rings a bath in some oil before slotting them into the block. Due to the boxer design, we cannot access the conrod bolts with the engine bolted together, so the pistons are fitted last. We have to then line the piston gudgeon hole up with the conrod small bearing and insert the gudgeon pin through the block via an access port, making sure everything is lined up correctly as to not cause any damage before flipping the block and repeating the process on the other side. And in case you're wondering, yes, I did fit the gudgeon pin circlips.
And that is the complete short motor. There are a few little things like some bung plugs and the oil pump and stuff, but I will do them off camera. If you guys have enjoyed this video and you're not already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button as well. It means a lot, helps out. In the next episode, we will start tackling the rest of the motor, the heads, the head gaskets, the head studs, and some choice parts to stop what's inevitably the most common thing to destroy a Subaru engine, oiling issues. So we've got some parts in there because this car is going to be used on the track. We do want to make sure it will survive. So stick around for the next video. You guys might even get to see what car it is. Till then, see you guys.